Hi, this is Andrew, and this is Keen On, the daily chat show featuring the world's leading thinkers and writers. Hello, everybody. Interesting piece in the New York Times a few days ago on how some of Silicon Valley's most prominent investors, of course, being venture capitalists, are turning against a certain Joe Biden. It includes men like Mark Andreessen, very influential. Peter Thiel, of course, who was never a great fan of Joe Biden. It's interesting politically, but it's interesting also in the sense that VCs seem to be like the weathermen. They understand the weather before everyone else. And my guests today on the show very much support this idea. Ilya Strebulaev and Alex Dang, both smart young men. One teaches at Stanford, another was a senior partner at McKinsey, have a new book out, The Venture Mindset, How to Make Smarter Bets and Achieve Extraordinary Growth. They're both joining me from the South Bay. I'm in San Francisco, where all the smart people are. I'm not sure. Well, we got a few smart people in San Francisco, Ilya, but mostly it's all down there around Stanford University where you teach. Maybe, Ilya, you can begin. I don't want to spend too much time talking about politics today, but the fact that venture capitalists seem now to be turning against Biden, should the Biden people be worried in the sense that these smart venture capitalists, the Mark Andreessens of the world, they seem to get the future before anyone else?
Well, first of all, venture capital, Andrew, is all about the future. Venture capitalists are those that try not just predict the future, but try to ensure that the future belongs to everybody, and that they're the first to catch it.
Well, I mean, Ilya, let's be honest, they own the future, not us. Mark Andreessen has monopolized, or men like him. They're not the most democratic of people, are they?
So I don't think that they own the future, This is what's interesting. I've been doing research at Stanford about this for 20 years. And do you know what I found, Andrew? Is that first, every second public company in the US that became public in the last 50 years was venture-backed. Those venture capitalists no longer own most of those companies. Every second one. If you look at top 10 companies in the US today by market cap, depending on the day, it's 6, 7, or 8, used to be venture-backed. And venture capitalists no longer own a large chunk of those companies. Those owned by shareholders, by many, many people who watching or listening to us now. So I don't think that's correct to say that venture capitalists own the future, but they use the venture mindset to develop the future, to shape the future in a way that will affect all of us.
Alex, let's bring you in. As I said, you worked for many years at McKinsey, so you understand the future also. Ilya, your co-author on the venture mindset, suggests that venture capitalists don't own the future, but they're not civically minded people. Their interest is in profiting from the future, isn't it? And so it's true, of course, as Ilya has noted, that most of our most powerful companies, the Googles, the Amazons of the world, were venture capitalist supported, and now they're publicly owned. But these venture capitalists like Mark Andreessen have become enormously wealthy from their investments in these startups.
That's totally true, Andrew. And obviously, I have to also admit that they also benefited users like you and me, because I'm Amazon user and I'm a Prime member. I used to be with Amazon for quite a while. So I think that venture capitalists, what they actually did, they unlocked the potential of all these companies and entrepreneurs behind them. And now we're benefiting from that. We daily use, or at least I daily use Uber. We from time to time use the app called Airbnb. I think that's the actual benefit that VCs and entrepreneurs that they backed delivered. This is the actual value add that they generated.
And let me add that, Andrew, Mark Andreessen and many other VCs became wealthy. And, incentives drive behavior. If you discover new companies and back those companies that became very successful, then you should participate in their success. Now, if you don't discover any companies and all your investments fail, then maybe you should not participate in a success because there are no successes. But I think all of those investors that you showed there on the photograph, including Mark Andreessen, Chamath Palihapitiya, Peter Thiel, and others, they all invested in companies that some of which became not only just very successful and earned them a lot of money and earned, by the way, a lot of money to others, but also changed, as Alex said, our life.
Yeah, and I don't want to turn this into a four against venture capitalists. Some of my best friends, to borrow a phrase, are VCs, including Albert Wenger, a very old friend from New York City, one of the partners at Union Square Ventures, and I have a great deal of respect for venture capitalists. Before we get, though, to the venture mindset, the arguments about making smarter bets, I think it's worth noting, and maybe one of you can jump in here, that nobody's born as a venture capitalist. You have to do something, or most people have to do something first. Tim Draper's been on this show, and of course he came from a VC dynasty, so he inherited certainly the right to be a VC. But most VCs, the Thiels and the Andreessens, have to prove themselves before. Andreessen, of course, was very much involved with Netscape in some ways. Without Andreessen, we wouldn't have the internet. So one of you can answer this question. What makes, we're going to get to the venture mindset in a second, but what makes a venture capitalist? A good one, that is.
Of course. So let me first of all mention what is the venture mindset. Because what makes a really good venture capitalist is that they follow some principles that are different from most of the principles that followed by traditional decision makers. And the whole idea, by the way, we wrote the book, The Venture Mindset, is because we believe that those principles that made them successful can make all the decision makers today, but potentially, especially those that are in innovation or leading large companies, they can make them successful too in their companies. So what makes the venture capitalist successful is they follow some specific principles. Let me give you, Andrew, an example. So you mentioned about Mark Andreessen and others, okay? And you mentioned that they invested in some companies that became successful. But do you know that, in fact, majority of venture capital investments are unsuccessful? And that is the trick of the trade. That is the business model. And that is one of the principles we talk about in the book. And the principle is called home runs matter, strikeouts don't. So if you talk to a successful venture capitalist, they might not even remember all those strikeouts that happened. But if they missed one deal that turned out to be a great investment, they will remember it forever.
Although they see every deal, so they're never going to get all of them. In a way, it's rather like the publishing industry. A good publisher will pick 10 books. One of them hopefully will be a huge success. Maybe another one or two will have some success, and the others are complete failures. Alex, coming back to this original question, what makes a good venture capitalist? Because not all great entrepreneurs turn into successful venture capitalists. Andreessen has, of course, but others haven't. One wonders how Steve Jobs, for example, would have been as a VC. What do you think are the qualities of a venture capitalist, successful one?
Look, I think, Andrew, it's important to be systemic about how you make decisions. Like Ilya just said, out of, say, 20 deals that VC would invest in, maybe 17 would actually fail. 2, 3 would be kind of okay-ish, and only one will become home run. And then you have to repeat this again and again and again, because you will still have to go back to your LPs or investors. You will invest your own money, and therefore, if you're lucky once, you would go bankrupt the second time. But successful, smart VCs and people that you just mentioned, they are raising fund and fund again and another one. That's, I think, the trick, that they are systemic about the whole process of how they make these key decisions. From the business model perspective, in terms of, I'm fine to fail 17 times out of 20, but also how they make a decision in between partners, because Andreessen Horowitz is a huge company. They have so many partners. How do they all agree? And what we learned, and we stated in the book, they actually agree to disagree. And that's another trick. And that's why we outline all 9 principles, from the way where the deals are coming from or how they source deals, to the way they deal with entrepreneurs and what matters to them. Do they value an entrepreneur or the business model? And finally, how they make that decision to invest or not. These 9 principles, that's what helped them, not just to become a great entrepreneur, or some of them, like you rightfully said, used to be successful entrepreneurs, but also how to make it a systemic win time and time again.
We're not computers, though. You talk about these 9 or 10 principles. It's not something that we can just program ourselves with. The great VCs seem to be people who are somehow suited to it. Sometimes they're successful entrepreneurs. Sometimes they're just journalists. One thinks of Mike Moritz, for example, from Sequoia Capital, a legendary, an Anglo-American journalist who made incredibly successful bets. One of the founding venture capitalists of Silicon Valley. So to come back, leaving aside your 10 principles, what kind of personalities lend themselves well to being a venture capitalist?
So, Andrew, we may leave principles, but we're going to come back to this because, in fact, that is what defines a successful venture capitalist. So you mentioned Mike Moritz, and I think if you look at Mike Moritz and his partners at Sequoia, they, for example, feature what I would call the prepared mind. What is the prepared mind? It means that they're relentless in trying to understand a specific idea. If you think that Mike Moritz just go around, meets this amazing founder, and makes a bet, that's a mistake. That is an urban Silicon Valley myth. Okay, let me tell you a story about one of the Sequoia's investments. Let me take you back to the year when the first iPhone was released. File sharing was not yet possible. Andrew, you still might remember the USB stick drive, and maybe some remember floppy disks.
Okay, yeah, I even remember, Alex, I'm old enough to, Ilya, I'm old enough to remember a time when the internet didn't exist.
Well, that was even longer. Okay, we have
I'm
examples.
not going to date myself. You probably can't remember that,
too.
can you? Can you remember a time before the internet?
I do. I'm young, but not that young enough. Okay. So that was 2007. But do you know that idea was out there? The idea of file sharing, the idea of future of Wi-Fi, the idea of smartphones. In July 2007, in fact, there was a tech blog called Mashable, and it posted a list of like 50 plus, I think 80 startups that were working on file sharing. And so Sequoia partners had a discussion and they said, oh, wow, that's a cool idea. That's actually going to be a large market. And do you know what they did? Mike Moritz and his partners, one of them was at the time Samir Gandhi and Doug Leone, Mike Moritz's partner. They went and talked to a lot of these startups. Like Samir Gandhi, whom I interviewed at the time, when I was writing a case, and he came to the Stanford Business School to talk to my venture capital class, he in fact met dozens of startups, dozens of founding teams, and he decided not to invest in any one of them. And then when those partners met 2 guys who in fact didn't have the money and they could not develop the prototype, but 2 young guys, serendipitously, in 2 days, they decided to put a lot of money at the time and became the first investors in what was turned out to be Dropbox. So why would you invest? You can think, oh, it's luck. Samir Gandhi, Mike Moritz, Doug Leone investing in Dropbox, and of course, all those other 80 startups fail. I think that is the prepared mind. So here is one feature of the prepared mind, which I see again and again in successful VCs.
Yeah, and you had an interesting Time magazine piece about the 118-hour decision, the power of the 118-hour decision. We're under the impression that VCs make decisions on young entrepreneurs, as they did perhaps with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook in the movie when Thiel met Zuckerberg, and made a $500,000 call. But mostly, as you say, it's a 118-hour mindset. But isn't that true of life itself? We all make intuitive decisions on people, but those bets are made in love, in business, in relationships, from our life experience.
Andrew, but I think that's exactly why we cannot learn from the venture mindset, so that we all make decisions based on gut feeling, intuition. But the question is what we are basing our intuition on. So is it the prepared mind? I think we all can benefit from that. So that when we see an interesting idea, and by the way, you're right, it should not be necessarily a team of founders because you're a VC investor. It could be falling in love, or it could be finding the next job or the next project if you work in a large organization. It's a pattern recognition. But just hope for pattern recognition, hope is not the best instrument around.
Alex, there's a critique of Silicon Valley and venture capitalists. I'm sure you've heard it many times, that most of the top venture capitalists in Silicon Valley were Stanford or Harvard graduates or dropouts, white men, and they only invest in similar types. Is there any truth to that?
I guess Ilya would be better to answer that specific question just because he has research about
Okay, Ilya, well, is there any truth to that critique that they don't invest in women, they don't invest in people of color, they don't invest in minorities because they have their own mindset, a cultural one, and they only want to bet on people like themselves?
So there is some truth to that, simply because if you look at statistics, especially historical statistics, you will see that most VCs are men, and many founders are men, and many founders are white men, even though that has been changing very, very rapidly. But this is the research that I've done. With my former student, several years ago, we created 50 fake startups. For each fake startup, we created a website, we created a profile, we created blurbs, etc. And then for each fake startup, we created 4 fake founders. Okay, a lot of fake stuff. And by the way, research was approved by Stanford committee. It's called IRB. So why 4 fake founders for each startup? Because we had a man and a woman founder, and a white and a non-white founder. And then we created, for each startup founder match pair, we created a blurb and sent cold call emails to actual VCs, actual active angel investors, okay? And this is what we found. First, we found that investors respond with a very high probability in a positive way, which is send us the pitch deck, send us, let's meet on Zoom to discuss your startup. By the way, that is also an interesting principle in the venture mindset, getting outside the 4 walls. They're trying to find serendipity. But also we found out that women and non-white, specifically Asian founders, are more likely to generate a response. Now, recently, not 10 years ago, we did this research, Andrew, just recently, okay? So I think that showcases that at least at the beginning of the funnel, where investors try to find those entrepreneurs, is that a lot of this bias that indeed was there, okay, is either no longer there or less important than it used to be.
Well, that's good news. We are speaking with two men, white men as it happens, who have spent a lot of time thinking about something they call the venture mindset, Ilya Strebulaev and Alex Dang. Ilya teaches at Stanford. Alex is a former McKinsey executive. I want to thank our friends at Liberties, a new quarterly of culture and politics, for bringing us such great guests as Ilya and Alex. Going to run a short feature about Liberties, and then we'll be back with our guests to talk more about the venture mindset. So don't go away, anyone.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens, Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We are speaking with two of the South Bay's smartest men, Ilya Strebulaev and Alex Dang, the co-authors of an interesting new book, The Venture Mindset, How to Make Smarter Bets and Achieve Extraordinary Growth. One thing I think that people don't quite understand about the venture world, Ilya and Alex, maybe Alex, you can take this one if you can, is that most venture capitalists also fail. We have the big winners, the Andreessens, the Mike Moritzes of the world. But it's just as a competitive a business, just as a winner-take-all business. So the venture business is no different from anyone else. So in terms of this venture mindset, some VCs have a more successful mindset than others. Is that true?
That's totally true, Andrew. And that's why we even defined in our book, and we use the term smart VCs. And smart VCs are the ones which, again, we have to make a reference to 9 principles that they follow. Say, for instance, one of the challenges that many venture capital firms face is the scaling issue. It's a one thing when you have a single partner or maybe 2 partners who just over a cup of coffee, thinking through the specific decks or details about a startup, they make a decision. And it's a completely different scale of a problem when you have 10 partners in the room. How do you make a decision? Do you want everyone to agree on the particular deal? Do you want half of them? Do you need a majority? How do you solve this kind of problem? And I think that's what separates smart VCs from the rest, the ones who would fail. If you continue to behave in the way that everyone should agree in the room, unanimously approve every single deal, then my guess and prediction that such a VC firm most likely would fail. Why? Because VCs are looking for outliers. And to be that outlier and to find such an outlier, you have to make sure that that deal will not be, this deal basically cannot be approved by everyone because it is an outlier.
Yeah,
Not
you have to
everyone
be
should agree on that,
counterintuitive.
right?
And
Absolutely.
I've been around the VCs and investors for many years. The thing that many people observe is that they often behave like sheep. Now they're all investing in AI companies. 10 years ago, they were all investing in social media companies. Is there some truth to that, Ilya, that many VCs are just like sheep, that they don't really think for themselves?
So I wouldn't call them sheep, given that I'm Stanford professor. So sheep is not exactly an academic term, but I would say that there's a big danger in the venture world and in the rest is what we call FOMO, fear of missing out. And that is what makes a lot of investors, in particular those who maybe don't follow those venture mindset principles, to behave like sheep, like you've said, because they are afraid of missing the train. Now, here is an important point, is that smart VCs, even if, let's say today, they invest in AI, who doesn't? But even within AI, there are a lot of now subspaces, subverticals, okay? And many of which spaces are not yet major ones. As Alex Rampel, a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, says, conviction beats consensus. And I think if you look at all the best deals of all times, it's typically about conviction. It's not about consensus.
And the conviction, often the received narrative, the cliche is that these people make bets on individuals. So they trust someone. And often young entrepreneurs or not such young entrepreneurs walk into VC offices, and people like Ron Conway, particularly, and Paul Graham, early stage people, bet on them. Is there any truth to that, or is that another delusion?
There is so much truth to that, Andrew. They definitely, VCs, make a bet on a jockey, not the horse. Obviously, any smart VC would look into the business model and whether the market is large enough And for biotech, of course, they will try to understand the technology behind the idea. But the challenge here is pretty straightforward. Early stage idea is just the idea. And going forward, say 3 months from now or 6 months from now, that team, and actually VCs will make a bet on a team, not just a single founder, they will face challenges and problems. They will have to pivot. They will have to change their behavior and business model. They will have to find a new solution to incoming problems. And that's where the team performance is way more important. Whatever you wrote in the business plan, you can just throw out the window straight away, because that's the learning mode that you need in the very beginning.
Do these guys ever read business plans? I always wonder in book publishing, for example, authors are always told by their agents, you've got to write a long plan. But one wonders whether smart publishers ever read the plans, because they're usually made up. And I'm always guessing the same is true of business plans too for VCs.
Good point, Andrew. So first is that smart VCs follow the principle say no 100 times. Meaning that, and that's in my research, for each one deal that they make, they pass on more than 100 other startups. Just think about this. 100 to 1. Now, you can't afford to read 100 business plans in detail, or really read it all, to make just one investment. So therefore, you're right, which is for most of the opportunities, they don't read the business plan. What they do, they use what I call the fast lane approach, which is they meet you, Andrew, as a founder, and they try to answer a very simple question. Why should I not continue talking to you? And they try to identify some red flags. So the red flags is about the team, as we discussed, the jockey, because the ideas are overrated. If the idea is great, but the jockey is not going to execute it, then there is no need to invest. I'd rather find somebody else. Remember my story of...
It's the horse rather than the jockey then that's important.
The jockey is very important. Now, everything is important, okay? But again, think about a story about Dropbox that we gave earlier. There were many teams trying to implement file sharing, and yet, okay, you search for the team that you believe is going to execute it right. And by the way, for executives in large organizations, I think that is where the venture mindset is going to be really helpful, because how many people will recall right now, our listeners, viewers, where they sit in the meetings through the presentations of hundreds of pages, decks, of discounted cash flow analysis, growth projections, all these accounting numbers and so on, and features. But they don't discuss who, in fact, is going to be in all those 25 people who are going to implement this.
Yeah, and you note in your book the value of a Jeff Bezos style short memo, maybe a one-pager, the rule that Bezos gave his executives at Amazon, that it's most important to be able to summarize all this. So are you suggesting that entrepreneurs perhaps watching should, even if they're not formally presenting a one-pager, should have a one-pager at the back of their mind when they pitch VCs?
I definitely do. As a former Amazonian myself, I think the tool works, and we brought that tool to other clients as a part of being part of McKinsey. And the reason behind that is very simple. It's when you have one page or 6 pages, you don't have all these tons of slides to present. You don't have to answer too many questions, but you do have to address the key ones. More importantly, in the VC world, the same kind of document would be called a memo. So a memo summarizes tough questions that you have to address and answer right away. We used to call them frequently asked questions at Amazon, but the questions are about risks. So that's why in some instances, VCs call themselves risk reduction engineers. And what they refer to is that they want to know what kind of risks they may expect. And of course, they will take these risks, but they want to make sure that they are aware of these risks so that as they learn, or in their case, entrepreneurs would learn, they would have answers and signals. Okay, this thing actually works or it doesn't. Maybe it's time to pivot. That's the power of a note.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned Jeff Bezos. Most people don't think of Bezos as an investor, but of course he was one of the very earliest, if not the earliest investor in Google, as was Mike Moritz. I think he was the first venture investor. At the time, it seemed as if the search market had been shut down, that there were already all the search companies we need. How do you establish the venture mindset so that you can think about markets which seem closed or opportunities which seem closed, as the search market did in 1997, and actually the reverse is true?
Now, first of all, Bezos is an amazing thing. He was the investor as the CEO of his company because I think he was thinking of Amazon as a portfolio of bets. And I think that is the right approach. And the same approach is when you think about the market that seemingly closed. By the way, the markets are never closed. There's always going to be disruption lurking around the corner, either technological disruption or disruption that is going to change the business model. So that would happen, of course, with the search market in 97. It was a technological disruption that changed the business model, okay, of the search.
Although at the time it wasn't obvious. Of course, Google didn't fall on their business model until about 2001, and the VCs almost forced it on them.
That is an interesting point, because what do you mean by business model?
Well, advertising
but that is the subsequent business model. If you think about even the technological change that Google introduced back in 97, 98, it was clear that it was not only much more efficient than existing search engines, but also that it was offering a very different solution. And as a result of that, the market is never closed. By the way, it's great that you mentioned search market, because right now we're in the environment where the search market is changing once again.
And we've got a Perplexity, for example, an AI search engine that's presenting itself. I think Amazon is a major investor, and all these companies, OpenAI in particular, are challenging Google to make AI the future of search, or revolutionizing search. I wonder, we talked about Bezos as an early stage investor, other iconic early stage investors in Silicon Valley, Ron Conway, Paul Graham, even Sam Altman was involved with with Paul Graham's organization. What's the difference in your mind between the venture mindset of a very early stage investor like Graham or Conway, and then venture capitalists at large firms like Andreessen Horowitz?
Well, first of all, the fund size does matter. Again, remember, home runs matter, strikeouts don't. But if you manage a very large fund, a multi-billion-dollar fund, then your definition of a home run is very different. So therefore, you have different criteria to invest, because you expect more in return. It's not necessarily you expect fewer strikeouts per each home run. It's just that the home run should be different. I think.
Sorry, go on.
I think that one additional small point is that you are comparing early investors, very early stage investors, like very often pre-VC and Mark and Andreessen Horowitz, let's say. But when we look at late stage investors, Andrew, so those that invest after Andreessen Horowitz put in their first check.
So a series C or D.
Series B, C, D, E, okay. Let's say, for example, Paul Madeira, who is the co-founder of Meritech Capital, that was put the second check in Facebook, and in many other companies. So they also follow all those venture-minded principles. Of course, there are differences. One is that, as Alex said, VCs are risk reduction engineers, meaning that some risk already has been reduced by the time the startup reaches Series B, C, D. As a result of that, you expect a few strikeouts, okay? So the model changes a little bit.
But so you're a home run hitter. The early stage investors are home run hitters. They can afford to strike out a lot more.
They can afford to strike out a lot more, but here is a very interesting observation, and especially if you listen to us from a large organization, like large mature corporation, you know, what we find is that those late stage investors facing less risk, they still have a lot more strikeouts than you would expect. I recently gave a strategic offsite to the CEO of a large company, a large global company, and we talked about strikeouts. And then he turned, the CEO, to his chief innovation officer in charge of the incubator, and he asked the question, so how many of our startups there failed? And there was a very proud response, none. Well, if you have no failures in your incubator, I guarantee you there will be no home runs as well.
Yeah,
So,
you're not
Andrew,
really
I
an
wish actually-
incubator. It's you guys are both born in Russia. You talk about home runs. Do you go to baseball games? Do you enjoy baseball?
Well, we became experts, or I would say experts is a bit too much, amateur semi-experts in baseball writing this book, because what we found out is that there is a lot of similarities between the venture capitalists in terms of statistics and betting averages and the best baseball players.
Are the is the simile, the metaphor, more appropriate for hitters or pitchers? Because pitchers are, of course, trying to get batters out, and batters are the ones who either strike out or hit home runs.
I think batters are more appropriate. I think, for at least that is when we look at the statistics. By the way, interesting enough, writing this book, Alex and I had a lot of fun because we compared VCs to those who participate in horse racing.
But it's very similar, yeah.
Those who play poker, okay? And it turns out to be that we became, I think we lost money in poker playing to a VC who is an amazing.
Yeah, I would never sit down with Mark Andreessen to play poker. I think we would all inevitably lose. What about the role of AI in the future of the venture mindset? I do a weekly tech roundup with my friend Keith Tier from That Was the Week newsletter, a very influential Silicon Valley investor and entrepreneur. He has his own AI VC startup. Is it possible that AI can replicate the venture mindset and make venture capitalists, physical venture capitalists, redundant?
So, Andrew, I think in essence, the answer would be similar to other sectors of economy, that it will be a very powerful tool to support VCs in their decision-making, in, say, filtering through thousands and thousands of opportunities that will come their way, or how to automate some of the parts of their daily job, say due diligence part, 118 hours that you mentioned before. Actually, some VCs spend up to 400 hours. And obviously, some of these hours could be automated with some help from AI. So will AI change the landscape? Obviously, yes. Will the decision-making process be much different from what we observe today and outlined in the book, The Venture Mindset? I'm not sure. I'm actually quite sure that we are human beings, will remain human beings, and we still will have to make all these important decisions. And tools may help us to make better decisions. But unfortunately, we're so biased, and these biases are coming and being within us for thousands of years, that hopefully AI would help to unbias us a bit. But again, it's going to be tough. So it's going to be us making these decisions and setting up the mechanisms to make sure that we make truly right decisions.
So it is, of course, an all too human issue, and then what defines us as humans, perhaps in contrast with the algorithms, is that we're moral. You're an old McKinsey person, Alex. McKinsey's got some very bad press recently for its involvement with Purdue Pharma and the OxyContin scandals. They clearly made a deep moral error. What about the venture mindset when it comes to what they should and shouldn't invest in? The subtitle of your book is How to Make Smarter Bets and Enjoy Extraordinary Growth. You don't mention how to make morally better bets. Do you believe in that? Should this be part of the venture mindset, to be investing in technologies and ideas that will make the world a better place? Because some people would argue that many of the venture investments over the last 30 years have actually made the world a worse place, particularly in terms of social media.
That's a good question, Andrew. You know that many investors who follow the venture mindset care deeply about the impact that they make on the wider world. Now, let's leave social media aside and some other stuff, which is When you create, like scientists, when you create new things, you don't really know where it will lead to. Okay. But for example, I work a lot with social impact investors, social impact angels, social impact VCs that clearly follow the venture mindset principles. In fact, became recently a member of our Stanford Graduate School of Business Impact Investment Committee, where students and some of the social impact investors invest in startup pursuing impact goals. Some of those clearly care a lot about impact. However, and this is, I think, really important, is that they also care about profitability, because the biggest impact is going to be when the ideas sustain themselves and then can scale, especially can scale globally.
Alex, do you have any thoughts on, especially as an old McKinsey person, on some of the morally questionable behavior of the consulting companies and the way in which not just the consulting giants, but some of the VCs in Silicon Valley have avoided dealing with some of these moral issues?
Andrew, I was lucky enough not to face such moral issues when I served my clients. And I'm not with McKinsey anymore. I'm just a senior advisor there. So I cannot comment on that particular story that you mentioned. But I think the question you're asking is, are these going to be just about dollars or other criteria which is important? And for VCs, the ones that we interviewed, there are so many things that they care deeply about. They still represent LPs, investors behind them, so they cannot ignore the profitability issue. But to some extent, they're so optimistic. And the whole reason why they are doing this tough job, VC job, is because they want to make sure that innovation would flourish, that entrepreneurs, and many of them were such entrepreneurs themselves, they want to support them. They want to give them that helping hand. They want to make sure that they have enough capital to try things. And in the very beginning, that's not a lot of capital. It's actually at seed stage, I would not say insignificant, but limited amount of money, because they want to give entrepreneurs a chance to try things. And I think that optimism and this willingness to help people to try things, that's what embedded. And I wish more of my former McKinsey clients and large organizations from Fortune 500 would do the same. Unfortunately, they're too often in this exploitation mode, while my piece of advice and what's outlined in the book is to explore more, to experiment more, to set some money and resources and time aside to make riskier bets, bolder bets, new type of bets.
Well, you guys have been very patient with me. Let's end with the book, The Venture Mindset, How to Make Smarter Bets and Achieve Extraordinary Growth. You both noted that you had 9 or 10 principles. To end, perhaps you might just pick, each of you, one of these principles that you think is the most important to achieve the venture mindset. So I'm asking you to be a venture capitalist and kill 8 or 9 of your children and only keep one. Perhaps, Ilya, you might begin. What's your most important principle? We can get rid of 8 or 9 of them, but we can't get rid of one.
Kill your darlings is what our editor was telling us all the time, as we were producing this very thick manuscript. So one principle I would choose is the principle we call double down or quit. And that is because it is universally one of the biggest pain points. When we have to make a decision again and again on the same problem, very often we continue to throw good money after bad money to support projects that no longer work. We are fret about sunk costs. This is where, smart VCs are very similar to professional poker players. The single biggest difference between amateur poker players and professional poker players is that professional poker players quit more often. They fold more often when they see that their hand is not as good. It's the same problem. Now, we talked about biases today, and from the point of view of biases, it's very difficult. Psychologists call it the escalation of commitment. It's very difficult to kill your darling. In fact, that is one of the biggest mistakes I've made as a Stanford professor when I came early on. I had so many research projects, I had difficulty killing them. And you have to prune the garden of weeds. So the way we describe in the book, by the way, behind each principle, including this one, are specific actions, specific behaviors that VCs came up with to deal with this. And it turns out to be that everybody, Andrew, including you, but everybody can use those methods to focus on the best projects.
Yeah, I certainly can. I've got far too. I need to kill lots of my darlings. I've got far too many podcast shows. Although, of course, I would never kill you guys. So, Ilya's darling. He's going to keep his kill your darlings. Alex, let's end with you. What's the one principle that you think is more important than any of the others to establish a venture mindset?
I would definitely pick good things take time. VCs are very patient investors. After they make their seed stage investment, they will have to wait 8, 10, 12 years before the company would IPO or get acquired. I wish many more traditional organizations would be as patient with new ideas. It's absolutely impossible to expect any idea, my idea, especially if it's a risky and innovative one, to flourish and to demonstrate results in 1 quarter. That's pretty impossible to expect that. Therefore, I think we all have to be a bit more patient when we make risky bets like VCs, and at least give ourselves 3, 5, 7 years to see the fruits of all your hard work. And I think that word patience would be the key word that I would pick in this long-term thinking that VCs